Walk Beyond 2040, and welcome to a very special edition of the Progressive Rock and Metal album review series. And today I'm going to be taking a look at the amazing and excellent catalogue from Polish ambient project Lunatic Soul. So, Lunatic Soul is a project that was formed in 2008 by bassist and vocalist Mariusz Duda, best known as the co founder and frontman for Riverside. And Lunatic Soul is a very different beast to Riverside. Riverside, of course, is a band effort that plays the progressive rock and progressive metal style of music, whereas Lunatic Soul is a solo effort with Mariusz Duda as the featured musician who plays all of the instruments such as bass, electric and acoustic guitars, piano, keyboards, and percussion. And he writes and composes all of the lyrics and the music. And Lunatic Soul's music is very heavily experimental. At times, it can be very unsettling, it can be very dark, and it can be very atmospheric. And occasionally, it can be very uplifting. And the themes that Lunatic Soul delve into are death, the afterlife, and personal and emotional journeys, adolescence and isolation, you name it. Lunatic Soul explore a variety of different themes, and the music of Lunatic Soul has influences and styles of progressive rock, electronic, folk, Middle Eastern, oriental, and world. And when you hear Lunatic Soul, more often than not, you would probably mistaken them to be Riverside, which is, of course, no surprise, especially as you've got Riverside's main frontman. But when you listen closely to Lunatic Soul, you realize that they have their own unique voice, which is very different and far removed from what Riverside bring to the table. And within the first 5 seconds, you know straight away it's Lunatic Soul because they have a very different and unique sound, which is very unusual. And a lot of the music at times is very laid back, but they can occasionally get very heavy. And you also occasionally have some guest musicians lending their contributions, but ultimately, this is very much a solo effort from Mariusz Duda, and it allows him to go in a variety of directions and also showcase a different side to his musical personality. So, for today's special edition, I am going to be discussing the entire catalogue of Lunatic Soul, which is a total of 8 studio albums. And as always, I'm going to be talking about each album individually, and I'll be choosing which one I think is the best one. Not an easy challenge. I've just got finished listening to the entire Lunatic Soul album catalogue, and I can honestly tell you now, this catalogue is incredibly strong. There are no bad albums in this catalogue whatsoever, and it's a trip. It is an amazing journey. At times, it can be very turbulent, it can be very dark, very brooding, and very unsettling. But I really enjoyed listening to all 8 albums of Lunatic Soul, and I loved it. And it's very hard for me to choose which one I think is the best one. So, what I will probably do is I'll just follow my gut instinct and just think about which Lunatic Soul album I enjoyed the most. And, you know, there is some excellent music. The quality of this catalogue's music is second to none. It's pretty close to perfection, and I wouldn't expect anything else but that from Mariusz Duda, who really excels in this environment. And as I said, he's the sole musician on all 8 albums. And you really get to see what an amazing composer Mariusz Duda really is, and more importantly, what a talented musician he is. So, we're going to start with the first album, and this one came out in 2008, and it's self titled, and this one is simply called Lunatic Soul. So, this is the debut album from Lunatic Soul, and I kind of call this one the Lost Riverside album because it has a lot of the influences and style of Riverside, and it kind of harkens back to their earlier stuff. Think of Out of Myself or somewhere around that time. You know, it's very heavy, it's very brooding, at times quite menacing, but really enjoyable. Really enjoyable music, and I knew from the moments I first heard this album, I thought to myself, okay, the tone has been set and we're in for a hell of a ride. And this album really didn't disappoint at all. I really enjoyed this one a lot. And I couldn't stop smiling and thinking to myself, sounds like Riverside, doesn't it? Or something close to that sort of style of music. And I really liked it. I thought this was a very exceptional album. Mariusz Duda is on top form, playing guitars, bass. He's doing everything. We've also got a little appearance from his Riverside bandmate, Michael Laplage, on keyboards and Hammond organ, who's featured on 2 tracks. And we've also got an appearance from Maciej Mela, who is featured on 1 track playing Ebo, who would go on to become a member of Riverside after replacing the late great Petra Gradowinski. And it's really good. I really enjoyed this one a lot. And of course, all of the music and lyrics are written and co composed by Mariusz Duda. And I just thought this was a very exceptional album. So, we've got Pre Birth, which is a great opener. The New Beginning is excellent. Out on a Limb is great. Summerland is great. The title track, Lunatic Soul, is brilliant. Where the Darkness is Deepest is excellent. Near Life Experience is brilliant. Adrift is great. The Final Truth and Waiting for the Dawn. Top to bottom, very strong album, very enjoyable, very heavy, very dark, and just above all else, great music. Mariusz Duda, an exceptional musician and a great singer as well. He is just on absolute fine form. And the standout tracks for me are Pre Birth, The New Beginning, Summerland, Lunatic Soul, Near Life Experience, The Final Truth, and Waiting for the Dawn. Absolutely love it. Very strong debut album. Right out of the gates of Riverside, Mariusz Duda comes out very strong and showcasing a different side to his playing and his singing and his composing. But above all else, very strong debut album and really good music. Very good music. It's ambient, it's proggy, it's got folk elements, it's got ambience, it's got everything. It's just a very enjoyable album. So there you have it. Lunatic Soul, an excellent debut album from Mariusz Duda, who really helped set the tone for what Lunatic Soul is going to be all about. Great album. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2010, and this one is called Lunatic Soul 2. So, just like in the name, this is the second album from Lunatic Soul, and it's equally as good as the first one. More brooding and dark tones on this album. Lots of gorgeous acoustic playing from Mariusz Duda. Lots of haunting vocals. Lots of atmospheric keyboards and electronics. You name it, this album has got it all. And again, much like the first one, Lunatic Soul 2 very enjoyable. Lots of great songs, lots of great playing, and just a real nice, great album in my opinion. And the cinematic quality is very strong on this album, as are all of these albums for that matter. But Lunatic Soul 2 equally as good as the first one. So we've got the In Between Kingdom, which is excellent. Otherwhere is brilliant. Suspended in Whiteness is brilliant. Asolium is great. Limbo is brilliant. Escape from Paradise is brilliant. And then we've got Transition, which is the longest track on this album, clocking in at 11 minutes. Absolutely brilliant. Gravestone Hill is great. And Wanderings is brilliant. Just a really good album. As I said, none of these albums are bad. And they all kind of like just continue from each other. As I said, this is kind of like one big story. You know, each album serves as chapters, and holy cow, Mariusz Duda has really excelled himself here, and he's on top form on all of these albums, and just brilliant performance from the Riverside frontman. And the standout tracks for me are the In Between Kingdom, Suspended in Whiteness, Escape from Paradise, Transition, and Wanderings. But really enjoyable album. I find that the acoustic tracks of Lunatic Soul are the most enjoyable. I tend to lean more towards those tracks because I really like listening to Mariusz Duda on acoustic guitar. He's a fantastic bass player, as we all know, but I just really enjoy listening to him on acoustic guitar and singing. I just think that's where he's on peak form, and I think in that sort of environment, that's where he's at his absolute best, in my opinion. But he sounds great from top to bottom, but I just like the acoustic tracks just a little bit more. I just think they're really exceptional. So there you have it. Lunatic Soul 2, a great album and follow up to Lunatic Soul. Just a fantastic album and a very strong album as well. All of these albums are incredibly strong, no weak ones whatsoever. So there you have it. Lunatic Soul 2. Excellent stuff. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2011, and this one is called Impressions. So this is the third album from Lunatic Soul, and once again, equally as good as the first two. And if you look at the album covers for Lunatic Soul, they're very basic, they're very simplistic, and if they look so when you look at like the first couple, they almost look like numbers, like number one and number two and number three, but they're not really what you would call like straight up numbers. There's kind of like a little shape of sorts, but from a distance they do look like numbers, but when you look close up, they're almost like cracks, you know, looking at a crack on the wall or something. And I kind of like that because a lot of these album covers for Lunatic Soul are very different, you know, and it's almost like as you're going through each album, it's almost like you're seeing a picture slowly starting to unravel. It's almost like glass is starting to crack. You know, you're starting to see things going on as you go through each picture. So the first album was a very plain cover, and the second album was quite a plain cover. And then when you get to the third album, it's almost like you're slowly starting to see something happening. You know, you're almost like you're seeing things unfold. And as I said, it's got that thematic thing going on with all these albums. There's a theme going on. As I said, all of these albums, they're like chapters. So you're slowly starting to see things unravel. And it's very interesting. It's a very unique concept. So so the title track Impressions is made up of 8 parts, and we've got 2 tracks that both appeared on 2 previous Lunatic Soul albums, but they're more like remixes. So at the core of this album is the title track, and as I said, it's 8 parts and very enjoyable stuff. And you really see that although it's one track made up of 8 parts, you really got to listen to it all the way through to really absorb and digest all of the music that Mariusz Duda has put together. And this album is primarily instrumental, so there's not really a lot of vocals, and it could very well be the most enjoyable of the catalogue. You know, I quite enjoyed this a lot. You know, I love hearing Mariusz sing. He's got a great voice, brilliant singer. But just hearing Mariusz Duda playing all instrumental pieces was quite a treat and kind of reminded me a little bit of the Reality Dream trilogy from Riverside. You know, they're all like 3 instrumental pieces. This is kind of like that, but very different, but incredible stuff. So we've got Impression 1, which is brilliant. Impression 2 is great. Impression 3, which is like one of the longest tracks on this album, is like over 7 minutes long. A really good track as well. Impression 4 is great. Impression 5 is brilliant. Impression 6, which is like 7 minutes and 33 seconds. It's like the longest track on here, just by about 33 seconds. That's really good. Then we got Impression 7 is brilliant, and we got Impression 8, which is great. And the 2 remix tracks we got are Gravestone Hill and Summerland. Both very enjoyable. Very different to hear 2 tracks remixed this way, but incredible stuff. And the standouts for me are Impression 1, Impression 3, Impression 6, and Impression 7 and Impression 8. But very good instrumental album. Really enjoyed this one a lot. One of my favourites from the Lunatic Soul catalogue. I just thought this was a very strong, dark, menacing album. Very atmospheric as well, as are all of these albums. But a very strong effort. As I said, no bad albums at all. That's why it's going to be very hard to choose which one is the best Lunatic Soul album because they're all good. But as an instrumental album, I would say this is in a league of its own and very good. Just absolutely brilliant stuff. So there you have it. Impressions, brilliant album, and a great follow up to the first 2 Lunatic Soul albums. Absolutely loved it. Great stuff. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2014, and this one is called Walking on a Flashlight Beam. I found myself really enjoying this one the most. I thought this one, to me, felt like the Lost Riverside album. I thought the material on this album was excellent and equally as good as the 3 previous Lunatic Soul albums that came before. But I found myself really liking this one a lot. And Mariusz Duda is the sole musician on this album, whereas the previous albums he had like an additional musician just providing some contributions. But for this one, Mariusz Duda is the sole artist on this album, and he plays everything except drums. But holy cow, this album absolutely rocked. Dark, brooding, atmospheric, very proggy almost in some areas, but I loved it. I thought this was a very good album, and there are a couple of tracks on here which I thought were just very exceptional. I just thought, holy cow, Mariusz Duda has really peaked here as a composer, singer, and musician. He just sounds absolutely fantastic. I thought this was a really good album, and I've got lots of favorites, but this one could very well be my favorite because this one really got my attention the most because a lot of the other albums, you know, they were very proggy and at times very ambient. This one is like that, but a lot more leaning towards the ambient side of things. But my goodness, excellent stuff and kind of harkened back to like the first couple Riverside albums, but just different, but really good stuff here. So we've got the first track, Shutting Out the Sun, which is brilliant. Cold is great. Gutter is brilliant. Stars Sellotaped is great. The Fear Within is brilliant. Treehouse is great. Pygmalion's Ladder is great. Sky Drawn in Crayon is great. And the title track, Walking on a Flashlight Beam, probably my favourite track of the entire album. Just really good. And all of the songs, top to bottom, are brilliant, but there are a couple of tracks on here that I thought were really good. So, standout tracks for me are Shutting Out the Sun, Gutter, Pygmalion's Ladder, which is like 12 minutes long, absolutely fantastic. Sky Drawn in Crayon is great, and Walking on a Flashlight Beam, which is probably my favourite song of the entire album. And it's the title track as well. It's just an absolute epic closer. It's 8 minutes long, but my goodness, absolutely fantastic. Very strong album from top to bottom and really good. Just a very good album, and Mariusz Duda on peak form. So there you have it. It's Walking on a Flashlight Beam. Excellent stuff. Absolutely love this one so much. Could very well be my favourite Lunatic Soul album. Just a masterpiece. Great stuff. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2017, and this one is called Fractured. Look very closely at each Lunatic Soul album. Cracks start to appear more and more, and from far away they almost look like numbers, which is what I mentioned earlier. But just noticing each album cover, cracks are appearing more and more. It's almost like you're looking into the psyche of someone's mind, and you're starting to see everything just slowly fall apart. That's how I look at it anyway. That's how it seems to me. So, Fractured, another great album from Lunatic Soul. A lot of these albums are clocking in total around about 30 to 40 minutes. So, there's quite relatively decent length albums. And there's atmospheric elements, there's folk elements, ambience, you name it. This album has got it all. And as I said, a lot of these albums follow a very simple and common theme. As I said earlier, they all serve as chapters in their own right. And I really enjoyed Fractured. I thought Fractured was a very good album. Certainly as good as the previous albums, but as I said before, I really enjoy the acoustic tracks from Mariusz Duda, where he's playing acoustic guitar. I just think he's a brilliant acoustic guitar player, and just a lovely, lush album. And all of these albums are quite lush. They've got a certain warmth to them, but with Mariusz Duda, it's not all just sunshine and bunnies. There is a dark side to Lunatic Soul's music as well, and a lot of the times when I was listening to these albums, some of it reminded me of Peter Gabriel, and a lot of it reminded me of Dead Can Dance, which of course was the band that Lisa Gerrard came out of. A lot of it did sound like Dead Can Dance, just that gothic sort of quality to the music. And of course, you've got the Riverside comparison, which is always going to be there because you've got the singer of Riverside. So obviously, the comparisons are unavoidable. So we've got Blood on the Tightrope, which is brilliant. Any More is great. Crumbling Teeth and the Owl Eyes is brilliant. Red Light Escape is great. The title track Fractured is brilliant. A Thousand Shards of Heaven, which is the longest track of this album, clocking in at 12 minutes and 16 seconds. That's a really good track as well. Battlefield is great. Another long track, which is like 9 minutes long. And then we've got Moving On, which is a fitting name for a closer. Moving On. I just think that's a really nice name for a track to close the album out. And what we got here, we got Mariusz Duda, who looks like he's very much deep in thought. Great stuff here. So, standout tracks for me are Blood on the Tightrope, Crumbling Teeth and the Owl Eyes, Red Light Escape, A Thousand Shards of Heaven, Battlefield, and Moving On. But top to bottom, very strong album, very enjoyable, and although maybe not as long as some of the others, but a lot of these albums, they're about the same length. The last two are quite long, but as I said, they are quite not short, but not too long. They're just about right, just somewhere in the middle. A lot of these albums are like clocking in at 40 to 50 minutes, some of them 30, but good stuff here. So there you have it. Fractured, very enjoyable Lunatic Soul album, and Mariusz Duda on peak form as always. Great stuff. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2018, and this one is called Under the Fragmented Sky. A great follow up to Fractured, and again, look very closely at the album covers. More cracks are appearing. It's almost like we're getting near to the end sort of scenario. The picture is slowly crumbling. And I never realised that when I was going through all of these albums, how much the picture just unfolds with all the album covers. And Under the Fragmented Sky, from what I remember, this was a highly successful album for Mariusz Duda. I was a little bit concerned that, with all the success that he's had with Lunatic Soul, I thought maybe it would spell curtains for Riverside, who are my all-time favourite band. But thankfully, that isn't the case. Why can't both coexist together? But I can't answer that. Only Marius can. But this is a really good album. Under the Fragmented Sky. I thought this was a great album. About the same length as Fractured, but still good stuff here. So we've got the opener, Heaven, which is a good track. Trials is great. We got Sorrow, which is very short and very mellow. And then we've got the title track, Under the Fragmented Sky, which is brilliant. Shadows is a great track. Rinsing the Night is brilliant. The Art of Repairing, which is like the longest track of the entire album, which is really good. And then we got Untamed, which is the closer, which is another great track as well. Top to bottom, very good album, equally as strong as Fractured. Just fantastic stuff, just absolutely beautiful music. And the standout tracks for me are Trials, Sorrow, Under the Fragmented Sky, Rinsing the Night, and Untamed. But really good stuff here. As I said, a lot of these albums, you know, depending on how you hear them, they're the sort of albums you could listen to on your own and just unwind. And if you close your eyes, let the music take you on the journey, it's almost like you're listening to a soundtrack for a movie because the music is quite cinematic in some spots, but still very good stuff, I would say. So there you have it, Under the Fragmented Sky, another fantastic album from Lunatic Soul. Absolutely love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2020, and it's a double album, and this one is called Through Shaded Woods. So, Through Shaded Woods is a very different Lunatic Soul album to the previous one. This album has got lots of influences of Scandinavian and folk elements, and it's a much more laid back album than the previous albums, which were a lot more dark and heavy and brooding. This album is quite light, there's very few electronic elements. The ambience influence is still prominent, but this sees Mariusz Duda go in a much more laid back and acoustic approach compared to the previous albums, which were much more heavy electronic driven. But a very good album, just some really strong and enjoyable material. And when I was listening to this album, it sounded like a soundtrack for The Witcher, which obviously came a few years after. But just that sort of Scandinavian and folk influenced style of music, this could have been used for The Witcher, because it does sound like someone riding a horse through the woods or walking through the fields. It's definitely got that sort of forest sort of element to it, hence the name Through Shaded Woods. It sounds like you're exploring the forest. It's got a very forest sort of quality to the music, but incredible stuff. Absolutely incredible. So on the disc one, we've got Navi, which is a really good track. The Passage is great, which is like 8 minutes and 57 seconds long. And then we got the title track, Through Shaded Woods, which is brilliant. Oblivion is another great track. Summoning Dance is great, which is like 9 minutes long. The Fountain is great. And then on disc two, we got Virage, Hyperphobia, and the longest track of the entire album, Transition 2, which clocks in at 27 minutes and 45 seconds. Top to bottom, great material, very strong, very enjoyable, and probably the lightest Lunatic Soul album out of the entire catalogue. It's got a very light quality to the music, and as I said, it sounds like you're walking through the woods, exploring the forest. Just really good stuff here. And the standout tracks for me are Through Shaded Woods, Summoning Dance, and The Fountain, and The Passage. And the standout tracks for me on disc 2 are Hyperphobia and Transition 2. Top to bottom, great album, very enjoyable, and as I said, probably the lightest Lunatic Soul album out of the entire catalogue. So there you have it. Through Shaded Woods, great album, and highly recommend getting this one. Really enjoyable. Absolutely love it. Very light, but very upbeat album from Lunatic Soul. Love it. So we move on to the next album, and this one came out in 2025, and it's a double album, and this one is called The World Under Unsung. So this is the newest and latest Lunatic Soul album, and it's a double album, and it marks the final chapter of a story that's spread across 8 albums, and it's pretty much showcasing the circle of life and death, where we see a solitary artist slash traveler journeying between life and death. And if you're going by the album cover, it more or less looks like the end of the world. And Mariusz Duda said that while this was the last Lunatic Soul album, no doubt there'll probably be more in the near future. This marks, as I said already, the final chapter of this massive, long story arc that has spread across 8 albums. And there's also a little insight into what order the albums go in if you're going to listen to all of them. So, The World Under Unsung is probably the longest album in the entire Lunatic Soul catalogue. It clocks in to a total of 90 plus minutes long, so it's well over an hour. And there's a lot of long songs, and it's a really good album, and pretty much in the style and realm of the previous Lunatic Soul albums. But when you listen to both discs, it definitely sounds like this is like the finale of a big long story. So again, the whole cinematic vibe coming into play once again. And you can really hear that this is a big, epic story. And Mariusz Duda does an excellent job in paying this off. Where he goes next with Lunatic Soul remains to be seen, but I'm very interested to see where he goes next after these 8 albums. So, unlike a lot of the previous Lunatic Soul albums, which would occasionally feature an additional musician, or Mariusz Duda would predominantly play most of the instruments. But for this album, Mariusz Duda has more or less assembled a small group of musicians to play the material, which is quite a rarity for Lunatic Soul because Lunatic Soul primarily was, you could say, a solo effort, a solo project, Mariusz Duda doing everything. So interesting to see where Lunatic Soul will go next. Does this mean that Mariusz Duda is going to turn the project into a full-fledged band? What does this mean for the future of Riverside? It's very hard to say, really. But we'll just have to wait and see, really. But there's no reason why you couldn't have both bands coexisting in the same room. But I can't answer that. As I said earlier, only Marius can answer it. But for this album, we've got drums, we've got saxophone. Obviously Marius is playing everything, but it really feels more like a band, and that's something I thought I would never see for a Lunatic Soul album, a group of musicians. So on disc one, we've got the title track, The World Under Unsung, which is a good opener. Loop of Fate is good. Good Memories Don't Want to Die is great. Monsters is great. The Prophecy is great. Mind Obscured, Heart Eclipsed, which is the longest track of disc one, which is clocking in at 11 minutes and 42 seconds. Very good track as well. And Torn in Two is brilliant. And then on disc two, we got Hands Made of Lead, which is great. Ardeur is great. Game Called Life is great. Confession is great. Parallels is brilliant. Self in Distorted Glass, which is like 10 minutes and 25 seconds long. And then we got the closer, The New End. So it's like over an hour's worth of music. Absolutely fantastic stuff here. And the standout tracks for me on disc one are Mind Obscured, Heart Eclipsed, Monsters, Good Memories Don't Want to Die, Torn in Two, and the title track, The World Under Unsung. And standout tracks for me on disc two are Self in Distorted Glass, Confession, Game Called Love, Life, Hands Made of Lead, and The New End. But top to bottom, probably the strongest Lunatic Soul album of the entire catalogue. And all of them are strong, but I think with this one, The World Under Unsung really makes a powerful statement, and it really does feel like a finale. And the order to listen to these albums are as follows. So, The World Under Unsung, Walking on a Flashlight Beam, Lunatic Soul 1, Lunatic Soul 2, Impressions, Through Shaded Woods, Under the Fragmented Sky, Fractured, The World Under Unsung. So that's the order you listen to all of these albums to really get the full story of what's going on. But very clever concept. So there you have it. The World Under Unsung, quite possibly the strongest album and the most powerful and important in the entire Lunatic Soul catalogue. Absolutely amazing stuff. So, which Lunatic Soul album do I think is the best one? As I said at the beginning, I've listened to the entire catalogue of Lunatic Soul, and there are no bad albums in this catalogue. Any of these albums could be a number one or an all time favourite. I've enjoyed listening to all 8 albums, and it's very tough. And as I said at the beginning, I'm going to follow my gut instinct and choose the album that I really enjoyed the most. And the one that I would consider to be the best Lunatic Soul album would probably be Walking on a Flashlight Beam. I thought this one spoke to me the most. I felt this was the album that Mariusz Duda really hit his peak in terms of creativity and as a musician and composer. And I just really enjoyed this album a lot. To me, it sounded like the Lost Riverside album. There are certain tracks that could have easily fit in on a Riverside album. I just thought this one really spoke to me the most, and some really great songs. Tracks like the title track, Pick a Million's Ladder, Sky Drawn in Crayon, Treehouse, so many great songs. I just thought this was a really good album, and it's probably my favourite Lunatic Soul album out of all eight. I enjoyed all of them. They're all great, they're all different, they all have their own personality, they all pretty much follow one continuous path, but this one was the one that really stood out to me the most. I thought this was a fantastic album, and it's just all Mariusz doing his thing, and probably his finest performance as far as Lunatic Soul is concerned. I just think he sounded absolutely incredible and just a really good album. So there you have it. Walking on a Flashlight Beam, the one that I consider to be the best Lunatic Soul album. Absolutely love this one so much. Fantastic album. So that's going to be it from me. I'm going to wrap this up now. What's your favourite Lunatic Soul album? Is it Lunatic Soul, Lunatic Soul 2, Impressions, Walking on a Flashlight Beam, Fractured, Under the Fragmented Sky, Through Shaded Woods, or The World Under Unsun? There's no right or wrong answer. We all have our favourite albums. You know what to do, guys. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave your thoughts and comments down below, and I will see all of you next time for another edition of the Progressive Rock and Metal album review series. So until next time, take care, everybody, and stay safe. And once again, as always, much appreciated. Thanks for listening.